All right. Good morning, y'all. 9 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to second day of Mod 2. All right. So this morning, kind of like a little background, this authentication, I'm looking at the slides already and I'm like, I already named this wrong. We're doing authentication today. Has anyone noticed that yet? These slides that I put in your channel, I would say they're like mainly for me. Sometimes I'll put notes in them if I talk through some things. I'll kind of state a question and then like link out, or not link out, just like bullet point out answers that we come up with. So you're always more than welcome to come back to these and see kind of what we talked through. Again, it's always in the recording as well. But like I said, these slides are, I would say, mainly for me, but you're more than welcome to follow along with them as well. All right, let me make sure that I get all my screens situated. Cool. All right. Thumbs up, thumbs down, just show that. Can you see my screen all right? Great. Awesome. So to kind of give you an overview of what I want to look at today, or just kind of the structure of today's class, we're going to start with the warm-up. I think with authentication, since it kind of is a new topic or just something that y'all haven't done before, I a lot of times like to kind of diagram things out and just show visually what's happening. And so I'll spend some time whiteboarding today on a few things. And this will be one of them, authentication with the Bcrypt gem. And I know a few of you have already talked about kind of ideas for authentication within this project. If you've read into this, this is how we expect you to use authentication within your project, would be using this Bcrypt gem. So definitely relevant to what you all are working on. We'll run through together. I'm going to use this Congress tracker. We'll actually use this repo throughout Mod 3, kind of like you did in Mod 2, I believe. You had like one repo that you did a lot of lessons on. This one I think is used for at least what I see in the lessons, I think it's used for like the first 2 weeks. So similar to Mod 2, I'll make a branch. I'll go ahead and once I'm done with it, push it up so that y'all have access to it. It'll just be under the authentication branch. And I'll kind of work through the lesson today while y'all are watching. But I do want to give you time. This is kind of where I'm going off of the lesson plan between today and tomorrow. I'll be teaching tomorrow's cookies and sessions lesson and looking at both today's lesson and what the plan originally was for today's lesson and what the plan is for tomorrow's lesson. I think it would make a little bit more sense to have kind of an overview of cookies and sessions today and then jump a little bit more in depth tomorrow into it. So in order to talk about like logging in a user and remembering a user, I think it's important that we have some background on cookies and sessions first. So we're going to do like a brief overview of that, not get too in depth. You're more than welcome to ask some questions, but I might say today, hey, let's wait until tomorrow to answer those questions. And then we'll finish up logging in. And if we have time, hopefully at the end, I'll have you all kind of refactor the code that we come up with today. Any questions before getting started on the warm-up? All right. Cool. So learning goals I have in the form of questions up here, and I want us to focus just on these first two, just on your own for right now. I want you to think about these two questions. So what is authentication? And as a user, when you register or when you log in, think about the applications that you've worked on, or not that you've worked on, but applications that you actually visit. When you log in or when you register as a user, what do you expect your experience to be like as that user once you register or once you log in? So just kind of brainstorming right now. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I just realized I don't have a timer. I'll go ahead and pull that up. 2 minutes to brainstorm on your own. Do about 30 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to ask for volunteers for this. So go ahead and just by raising your hand, what did you come up with? What is authentication? Mike.
It's a way to validate that you are who you say you are.
Yeah, cool. Validate you are who you say you are. I think a lot of times we think about authentication as asking that question, just like you said, Mike, of who are you, right? That's what our application is asking our client. What else? Joe.
I would say usually it involves a login.
Mm-hmm. Why do you say usually?
Okay, it always involves a login.
Okay. Of some sort, right?
Yeah.
Something that is able to identify who someone is, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. Who are you? And that's kind of the question that we're trying to answer there. Involves a login. How about, I guess this kind of goes into the second question. Oh, go ahead, George.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that usually involves what you can do as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna put that down here. I like that. So kind of thinking about like what you would expect. Actually, yeah, let's put that here too. Helps determine what you have access to. And that kind of gets into that idea of like authorization, right? Like authentication is who are you? Authorization is what do you have access to? But in order to determine what you have access to, we got to first know who are you. So it helps lead us to authorization. Yeah, so I guess down here as a user, when you register or log into an application, what do you expect to happen? Maybe something with that I put here for like part D is one expectation I would have is that I have more access than a non-authenticated user. Or there's some other privileges that I would get. What else for the second part of your warm-up? Prisa?
I think that whatever the user inputs, it's checked by comparing the credentials provided versus what is stored in the database.
Okay, yeah, awesome. So takes credentials provided by the client or the user, I'll say here, and checks against what's stored in the database. Great, I like that. Joey?
Yeah, I kind of thought of it from less of like a authorization, but maybe more of like a curated experience based on your identity. So like dynamic things coming in and out, or lists populating that weren't there, things like that.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by more dynamic things coming in and out once you're logged in?
For example, if you're a visitor, you would not have any favorites for like a Netflix platform, but once you're logged in, there would be a context to give you a favorites based on who you are.
Yes, cool. And that kind of goes with this like part A here. We get like more access to be able to get, I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess we can think of that like as more dynamic data because it's specific to a certain user. More access to be able to get dynamic data. Cool. Anyone else have anything to add here? I like, Joey, that you're kind of going at it from this perspective of what would be my experience as a user. How about when you log in? This is something that like we don't really think about too much. And I think I kind of mentioned it in our learning goals. But when you log in and you're navigating the site, what do you not even think about, but is actually happening? Maybe I'm wording this weird. Joey?
Well, like a lot of stuff is like geolocation and geospecific. So a lot of times, like once you know somebody's identity and basic like PII, you could say like, okay, so their form fields need to be 10 digits long for the phone number or 15 digits long. Their
Yeah.
currency is euro, not dollar. So like you can dynamically make an experience a little bit more native once you have like a login information that says this person gets like the European experience versus the US experience.
Yeah, I think that might even come more with where the request or what the request actually is coming from, specifically within from your browser, like the domain. Whether it's, yeah, I think that is almost determined before logging in where you're from. Jahara?
Your data is being collected and you're being tracked with third-party cookies. And so if you are an authenticated user, it's more easy for the website to go in their database, remember preferences, build a profile about you, and then target ads for you.
Awesome. Yeah. Yep. Tracked with cookies. We'll talk a little bit about that today. I think the main thing that I wanted to hit on here, which we're going to, again, talk a little bit more the second half of class today, is when you log in or when you log in, you are remembered, right? It's not like every single time you go to visit another page, you have to log in again. And same thing with registering. As soon as I register, how often do you register? And then they're like, okay, now go ahead and log in. When you register, you're automatically logged in for most sites. So I think another thing here that I just want to kind of point out and put this on your minds too while we go through this lesson is, as a user that's logged in, once you're authenticated, you stay logged in, at least for the duration of that session, right? While your browser is still open, or unless something were to time out, then you would be logged out. And you can set different expirations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in depth. But once you're logged in, or once you register, you can expect to be logged in and remembered. Any questions that pop up from this like quick warm up? Jahara, I see your hands up. Was that from before? Oh, you're good. No worries. Okay. Awesome. So like I said, I want to diagram this out a little bit and allow some room to just like see this at a high level. And then we'll kind of jump into the code. We'll probably take a break in the middle there. But to do that, I put a link in the slides for this mirror link. I'm going to go ahead and use this as a whiteboard, and y'all have access to that if you want to look at it on your screen, but I'm obviously sharing this so you can see it right now. And it's been a while since I've tried writing on this tablet, so we will see how well my handwriting comes across. All right. Cool. All right, so this kind of, oh, I guess I'll just put up here. Wow, already off to a great start, Meg. Can you all see that all right when I'm sharing this? Okay, cool. All right, so I want us to imagine that our app has, let's say, a registration form. So over here, I'm gonna go ahead and put just a little expected register form. And when we register, we need some type of like username, maybe it's your email. We'll also need a password. Sometimes you see a password confirmation, as well as like other information that you want to save for that user upon creation. I think for now, just to kind of make this simple, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's have a email field. And then let's also have a password field. And we can worry about, like I said, we could do a password confirmation if we wanted to, but just for now, let's keep it simple. And then maybe we have like a little submit button down here. All right. And our expectation, and I think this kind of goes back to what Brisa had said, is our expectation is that when the user fills in their credentials, or in this case, they're creating their account. So when they fill in their email and what they want their password to be, we want to take those credentials and store them within our application, store them in our database. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and just make our database over here. Hi, George. Hi, Ryan. And we'll go ahead and put a little users table in here. Users, great. And we'll just say, like I said, we're going to have an email. And we're also going to have a password. So in this case, I should not be drawing on my lap. Kind of our expectation now is, or at least what we're thinking, is we want to take this email and we want to take this password. Once we hit submit, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make some type of post to create a user. So we'll take these two and we want to post it so that we get something in here like, let's say I put, I'm just going to write this over here, meg@test.com. And let's say my password is I love foosball. Foosball. Did I spell foosball? I don't know. We're making this up. So in here, we're saying, okay, let's go ahead and store this. Let's go ahead and store my password as I love foosball. And let's go ahead and store my email in here as meg@test.com. I'll be the first one in there. And this is kind of like what we're used to in a way with coming from Mod 2. We take something that we're trying to create, take the data from our user that we're trying to create, and we store it into our database. And I think that a lot of you might be thinking, I don't really love this. And if you are one of those people that's saying, I don't really love this, raise your hand and tell me why you don't really love this. Everyone loves it. Ksenia?
Yeah, so we want to encrypt password because the holder of the database can have access to personal information and use it.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Great, thanks. That's exactly what I was looking for. So right now we're storing this email and the password just as plain text. We're saying user gave me these two things. They gave me their email, they gave me their password. Okay, I'll store that so that I can remember it. And so that next time they log in, I can check to make sure they gave me the right username and password, and then I can log them in and that'll be fine. But the issue with it is storing something in plain text is pretty risky. And so just like Ksenia said, something like a password should be protected. And so what we are going to use is some type of encryption. And that's where this Bcrypt gem comes in. So I'm just going to take, oh, that's a highlighter. Cool. And let's get rid of this. All right, so let's say, love drawing. This reminds me when I taught middle school math and I would draw, do you remember like functions, learning about functions? You'd have a function machine. This is kind of what I'm imagining right now, although it looks like a stomach or something. All right, let's imagine that this is Bcrypt. All right, and when we go ahead and we say, yep, let's go ahead and have this user submit this to create a user, to create their own user. We're going to go ahead and we're going to send a post request to be able to create a user. Before it gets saved into the database, we're going to do something with this password. And this password, Ksenia already mentioned, we want to encrypt it. So these are kind of go in two different directions. We're going to say email. We're going to put you in like a little holding pattern for right now. And password, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this I love foosball. And we're going to put you through this encryption. And when you come out, you're going to look like some alphanumeric something that's going to be, this actually ends up becoming the same length no matter how big the original password string was. It's going to come out as a string that's encrypted. And this is actually what's going to get stored into the database. All that's happening here within this Bcrypt gem, I say all that's happening, there's a lot that's happening, but what I want us to just like, and we don't need to know this at like a fine detail, but this type of encapsulation here, really, if you look at the gem and if you look at the code with it, there's just like truly just like a ton of math going on in here and math. And this is what's creating our hashing algorithm. Another way that we can kind of, I think you might hear some other words for what comes out of this hashing algorithm. Sometimes we call this, like I said, we could call it a hash. You might even hear it called, this is great because I made it look like a stomach, a digest. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. Some people will, or I've also heard it called like a digital fingerprint, right? It's mapping you back to the original user. So hash, digest, it could be a digital fingerprint. All of them mean the same thing. And the cool thing with this hashing algorithm is it is only one way. So when we put our string in, it gets encrypted, it comes out. This encryption is only happening one way. This is so complex that it truly should take years and years and years in order for this to be decrypted. And that's the goal of this hashing algorithm. I think with Bcrypt, and there's different hashing algorithms. I believe that this one uses, anyone know? I don't know if anyone's, I think it's like SHA-256. Let me write that up here. You can take a look if you want at this. SHA-256, that's the algorithm. There's also MD5 is another common one. And SHA-256 is pretty popular because I think it's one of the ones that takes the longest. And you don't, as much as you want to like optimize your authentication, you also don't want to have a quick encryption, right? The quicker the encryption, the easier it would be to crack. And so we want this to take a while. I think MD5 is a little bit quicker, which again means easier to decrypt. So the longer your encryption, kind of the better. Andrew, did you have a question?
Where exactly does this transformation take place? Is it taking place on the server? Is it taking place in your computer? Is there some nebulous ether place in between the
That's a great question.
database? Yeah, where is it?
Yeah, so we'll actually see when going through this in code that there's actually going to be a method that we put in your model, similar to a validation. Although, so this method that we'll put in is called hasSecurePassword. And what it does is it checks for a few things. It checks for the length of the password. It checks to make sure that a password field came through. And it also works with the Bcrypt gem to encrypt that password if it came through. So we'll see that in a little bit. But to kind of answer your question right now, Andrew, this happens before it gets saved to the database. And we tell it to do this in the model. Does that answer your question for now?
Yeah, but then I kind of wonder, how does the server know how to decrypt anything? And how does it know how to match up the decryptions?
That's a great, okay, I love that. That's good. So let's run through this a little bit more. Austin, I'm going to come back to that Andrew. Austin, did you have a question right now before I kind of jump into Andrew's question with it?
Yeah, my question was, is it unconventional to ever encrypt your email?
Is it unconventional to encrypt your email? I don't think it's not that it's unconventional. I just think it's maybe not necessary. And that's kind of up to you if you want to, maybe you want to kind of leave that as like a privacy for the user. And so that you don't know exactly who that user is or where they're coming from or what their email address is. That would be your decision as the developer.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Ksenia?
So this may be a bit off topic, but whenever encryption happens, is it does algorithm contain any random steps? Like, is it always the same? Like if the password is this way, it's always going to spit out this particular sequence of characters, or is it always random?
Yeah,
it's not really relevant, but I'm curious.
No, I think that's relevant. I think that's good. Y'all are asking great questions. No, not with this, because in order to match, let's say like right now, we register a user and they get this encrypted password. Eventually, when they log in, we're going to have to match their credentials with what we have in the database. And what we're storing in the database is this encryption. So when they log in, they're going to give their email and their password again. And what's going to happen is we're going to re-encrypt that password that they just gave us and see if that encryption matches with what we stored in the database. So if there was something random, then we wouldn't be able to match it. You can though, and I think the lesson plan talks a little bit about this. I think it should. Another option you can do to kind of like make your encryption a little bit more secure is you can add salt to it, which is just like an additional layer of encryption. And that's something that you can use other gems for that, or you can create it yourself of just like, adding some other form of encryption, another layer of math on top of what's already encrypted. And then that would also be used within the decryption process as well. But no, nothing random.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So all these data leaks that like are published, like Wells Fargo and whatnot, does that mean that somebody decrypted those passwords, or does it mean that just the owner of the database did a crappy job of encrypting it?
Oh, you're saying when there's some type of breach in the system?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be either of those. There could have been an encryption that was discovered. There could also be the way that they stored it was not secure. I think there's a few reasons why those things happen. And I'm trying to think too. I was just thinking of this. Yeah, there's a lot of helpful gems to be able to encrypt, and depending on the hashing algorithm that's used, some are more secure than others. And if someone knows the hashing algorithm that's being used, and they can kind of go backwards if it's not that secure. All right, I want to go ahead and kind of hop back to Andrew's question. I think if I remember correctly, Andrew, you let me know if I'm not answering it now, because I feel like we are a few questions back from when you asked it. So looking at this password that came in, we came in with this password of I love foosball. We're coming through, and this output, this hash output here, something that Bcrypt does is when we get this password coming through Bcrypt, it actually changes the key of this. It's no longer a password, but it's a password digest. So you'll see in this is unique to Bcrypt and how they name it when it becomes encrypted. But now this becomes password digest. So we're no longer storing password in the database, we're storing password digest. Sorry, I feel like green is not a good color for this. So this goes ahead and gets stored into our password field. We have whatever I put here, 12LM ... And then this email comes along. And also gets stored in our email field. I want to go back, Andrew. I want to make sure that your question is being answered. For some reason in my head, I was like, let me finish the strawing and then maybe that'll answer your question. What was your question again? Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I believe my question is, how on earth does the system know how to unencrypt something once it's encrypted something, and like link up the math that you used to encrypt it with the math that they're using to unencrypt it? If it's
I think I got you now.
yeah.
So your server should never, you should never be able to unencrypt a password. That would not make it secure. So the encryption, we're leaning on Bcrypt to be able to encrypt a password, and encrypt a string is really what that password is, encrypt a string. And so let's kind of think of this now as kind of what you're saying, Andrew. Let's think of it from like the login perspective. When we log in, similarly, we're going to have an email and we're going to have our password. And when we hit that submit button, then we're going to go through a similar process. That what we're actually doing, we're not creating a user here, but we're checking the credentials that are given to us against what we have stored in the database. So we could, trying to think how to say this without giving away too much that we're going to be doing, or without confusing you. Let's say we make a request to log in. Similarly, this email is going to get sent along with our request, but our password is still going to get sent through Bcrypt, and it's going to come out the same way, since that hashing algorithm, just like Ksenia kind of brought up, whatever gets put into it, if it's the same string, like if I use I love foosball for my password and Andrew, you use I love foosball also, our passwords are going to be stored in the database the same way. They're going to be encrypted and stored the same way. So it would still come out like this. And when I log in, it's going to check against what I have stored in my user's database for their password digest. And if what came out, sorry, my dog is barking in his sleep. Can you hear that? If it comes out and what this encryption is matches the encrypted password digest in the database for that user with this email address, then we can log them in. But our server does not, we're never unencrypting this password. We're only encrypting the strings that come through and checking if the encrypted version of that string matches what we stored. But again, this is one way. That's why we can never decrypt it, or we shouldn't ever be able to decrypt it, I should say. Does that make sense, Andrew? Or what other questions does that bring up, I should ask?
Yeah, well, that brings up one random question. If somebody could figure out what the encryption is, could they send the encryption without encrypting it, without going through the process of encryption, and then basically have your password that way?
If someone figured out what this was?
Yeah, if they found your encryption, like they have access to your database. The whole point of this is so that if somebody accesses the database, they don't know your password, right?
Yes.
So suppose they access the database and then they say, okay, I'm going to type in the encryption word for word. And now I'm going to send it, and I'm going to do something that makes it skip the encrypting process. So I'm not encrypting an encryption, I'm just sending the encryption. and then it thinks, oh, I got the correct encryption. They must have typed in the right password, but they didn't. So
yeah, I see where you're going. That's why we have to ensure that when we are logging in or when we're registering, that it has to go through this. Whatever gets sent here has to go through our encryption in order to even get to the database to check. Khan.
Hey, so then I'm assuming using Andrew's example, we know word for word what that encryption key is. It still has to go through Bcrypt. So then what happens is that encryption key ends up being encrypted again into some other key.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for following that through and bringing us there. Yeah, this would have to go through Bcrypt again. And since now the actual encryption string would get encrypted, it's not going to match what's in the database. Good questions, y'all. All right, this is kind of what I wanted to just diagram out to give us an idea of like what is happening. I didn't want to jump in and create a users table with the column of password digest without talking about like where does that column come from. So yeah, this is kind of what I wanted to go over. I want to jump into code to kind of go through this and talk about setting this up. We'll start with registering and then move to logging in. But I want to give us a little bit of a break first. So let's go ahead. Let's come back at 44. 44. All right, let's go ahead back to these learning goals. And this third question that I had on here, I just want to make sure we come back and answer it so that we have notes somewhere. What is Bcrypt is this question here. So I'm just going to take volunteers for this and we'll just get something to fill this out and then we'll jump into the code. So how would you define this? What is Bcrypt? Or we could think about why do we use it? Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab. What I kind of got from it is I got this from the website. It's an algorithm that essentially takes the data, which is the password that the user puts in, and then it just creates a like one-way hash, like a non-reversible hash. And I think that's all Bcrypt does, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, great. Encrypted hash. I guess I don't need to say this. Hash is just an encrypted string. But I'm going to leave that there. Algorithm that takes a string and makes a one-way encrypted hash. Great. I'm also going to add here that it is a gem that we use, frequently used for authentication. Cool. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that? I'm good with those two things. All right. Let's go ahead then and let's take a look. I'm going to, for the most part, be walking through the lesson plan. I might go a little bit off of it, but we'll definitely get the items on the lesson plan done. All right, so looking at the lesson plan, I'm going to be starting at the registering users section. And let's go ahead. I'm going to make a test for that first. So let's go ahead and do a features folder. And I'm just going to make a registration spec. You could also maybe like new user spec, something like that. Let's call it registration spec for now. And we're going to require, oh, that's really small. All right. Does anyone need that to be bigger? Feel free to unmute yourself and shout out if you need this to be bigger. Okay. And we are working on registration. And this is what I had from, I just copied this from the lesson plan. So as a visitor, when I visit the root path and I click a link that says sign up to be a user, I can enter registration details in a form, submit that form. I should see a welcome message with my username, and my user details have been saved in the database. So let's go ahead here. I'm just going to make this test registration. I can create a new user and save that user to the database. All right, so let's visit we'll use our path helpers, root path. And I click a link that says sign up to be a user. And I can enter registration details in a form. I think in the lesson plan, it uses username. I'm going to use email just because that's how I diagrammed it out just now. And our password, I'll say I love foosball. Great. And then let's go ahead and click a button to log in. Submit that form. Cool. Then I should see a welcome message with my username, and my user details have been saved in the database. So I'm going to expect the page to have content of welcome, meg@test.com. And I guess what else can I do here to, my user details have been saved in the database. I think what I might do here is say new user is equal to user.last and just check that new user.email is meg@test.com. I could also check to make sure that my encryption is working if I really wanted to do this, and just make sure that user dot, I guess in this case it would be password digest, that it wouldn't be equal to I love foosball. I think I'm okay with just doing this to make sure that it's in the database and that it's the user that I'm expecting it to be able to kind of satisfy this last part of the user story. My user details have been saved in the database. Yeah, I think I like that. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. Oh, and I need to create my database. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so this first part, I'm going to run through this first part kind of quick, just because I think this is a little bit of a review from Mod 2, just creating this homepage. So we have our route path here. I'm going to go ahead into my routes and go ahead and create a route. And let's have that go to a welcome index. We need our welcome controller. So let's go ahead and make that controller. Welcome controller.rb. And I'm going to go ahead and just put this index method in here for now. And I think it's going to complain that I don't have a view for that yet. Yes. Okay, so no view for this. I think I'm missing one part of my test now that I'm thinking about this. Oh wait, no, I think I added, did I add? Oh yeah, cool. Click link to sign up to be user. For some reason, I thought that I left that out. Okay, so I still need a view for my welcomes index. So we're going to go ahead and make that view. Going to create a new folder for welcome and index. And in here, we're expecting to have a link for creating a new user. Let me just run it, make sure it's all hooked up together. Yes, great. So sign up to be a user, that's what we're missing. So let's go ahead and make a link to sign up to be a new user. And where do I want this to go? I want this to go to a registration path, which I guess is just a new user. Did I put that in my test too? I think I skipped over some things. Let's see. Click link, sign up to be a user, and then I just went directly to filling this out. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the path that I want to be on. Let's just say expect current path to equal register. Yeah, I'm okay with that. And let me run this just to make sure that's the next thing I need to do. Of course, missing an end. There we go. Okay, so expected the current path to be /register when we click on this sign up to be a user link, but we're still on this root path. So I'm going to go ahead here and let's go ahead and put this register path in, and then we'll have to create that route. Yeah, no route matches get register. Let's go and create that. I think with this like get register, I want this to go to really what we're trying to do is create a new user. So I like thinking about this, and I know that this isn't necessarily, I don't really want the user to see user/new. I'd rather them see register. So I think I'm going to use that instead. But I do want this to still go to users new, because I'm creating a new user, and that's going to render the form or the page to register a new user. Cool. Uninitialized constant users controller. We need to go ahead and make that. And we'll need this new in there. And then just to kind of follow this through, we're going to need a view for the new user. So let's have a users folder in here, and then just a new.html.erb. All right, let's run this. I think that all of this was like set up that I wanted to go through with y'all. I know it's a little bit of a review, but now we're going to jump into the registration portion. Great. So we don't have this form. So we're going to have to create that form on our new page. So we're on it right now. I'm just going to put register up here. And then, are you all familiar with, someone can unmute themselves and tell me this? I'm just still learning what y'all are coming from Mod 2 with. Did you all use form tags or form widths in Mod 2, or are you familiar with form widths? I guess is my question that I want to ask.
We used form width.
Okay, cool. Great. I got to remember all my Rails specific things. So form width. We're going to be creating a user. So I want to bind this to a model We'll have local true. And we need our actual block variable. It's going to use F. And we want a label tag. Okay, what do we want here? We just want our email. I guess for this right now, we just need email. We're also going to need a password field. So let's go ahead and do f.label. We'll have email. Field. And then for password, I'm going to do same thing, password here. There's also, I could use a text field, but to get those dots to show up, you can use a password field. Notice here that I'm using password. I'm not using password digest. This is just the name of the field that I'm using. Bcrypt is going to be responsible for creating that key of password digest to save into our database. But for right now, I'm just saying, let's make this field called password. And that's how we're going to take in information from our user. And the last thing I need here is a submit button. And what did I have it as? I think I just had it as well. I don't want it to be login. I want it to be register. Okay. It's been a while. Does that, I think that looks fine. Form with. It's been a while since I've used that. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay. What do we have here? No route matches, post/register. So I'm trying to get this. Oh, gosh, does anyone know what's happening here? Or why I'm getting this kind of like misleading error here? I think I know what's happening. Andrew?
I think you have to state, oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, you're fine. Go ahead, Andrew, and then we'll come to George.
Earlier, I think you might have written get /register instead of post.
I think in the routes, I do have that because I wanted it to go to this user's new.
Okay, then then the issue would be that there isn't a post version.
Yeah, and I could go ahead and create that route. Let me jump to George. George, what are you thinking? What are you thinking this means, and what do you think the next step would be?
Can you type in Rails routes real quick?
Yeah.
Word. Okay, I think you have to define the URL that you're actually accessing inside of the form, because if you have just a generic user URL, then when you punch into the form and scroll up in like the error message again, I'm thinking that it's routing to a different post register, and yeah, I think it's just going to like it's going to a route that's supposed to say register, but we don't have a route defined, so we just have to like manually do it because they think you handle the route. But I also wasn't really paying too much attention. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
This is something that it happens to me a lot.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a misleading error. Let me see, Aiden, what do you think?
I could be misremembering, but when you're trying to make something new with form with model, I think you could change @user to _user.new.
Yeah. I could do that. We don't really want to call directly on our model within our view, but I think what might be happening here, I didn't even think of this when we were doing it, but I think what's probably happening, because right now it's trying to make a prediction. Our form with is like trying to be smart. And it's like, okay, well, you're on a register page right now. You're on a register path. So I'm going to go ahead and make a post to /register now. But with this, I don't think since we haven't defined what user is, it can't make that prediction accurately. And so we could say at user.new, let's see if that changes this here. Now I'm curious. Oh, that's not what I want. Yeah, and this isn't even going to get us to the error that I'm hoping it to, because we don't even have user defined. But I think it's something along those lines that it's not able to accurately make that prediction without us having defined what that user model is. And so we're going to kind of like take a little step away here, since in order to create a user, we actually have to have space for that in our database. So let me go ahead and just for right now, I'm going to switch this to @user. And I'm also in my controller, let's say users controller. I'm going to go ahead and just put this here as something that we want to do, is we want to pass over this like @user as being user.new, just like Aiden, you had mentioned, to be able to bind that model to our form. But the issue that we're running into now we're not quite there yet. We still have to create this user, initialize constant. We have this user here. So I could go ahead right now and, I mean, the issue is that we don't have that in our database, but to kind of follow along with these errors, I could say, all right, well, let's go ahead and let's create a model then. Let's go ahead and make a users model, class user. Let's have it inherit from application record. And now let's see what happens. Yeah, now we're getting this like Postgres undefined table relation users does not exist. Okay. All right, so we have to create this in our database. And kind of thinking back to what we talked about during, I guess, kind of our warm up, but just this diagram here. We're talking about like how do we want to save this into our database? And with the anticipation of using this Bcrypt gem, we know that Bcrypt is going to take a field of password. That's kind of like a keyword that Bcrypt is looking for. It's going to look for that password field, and it's going to encrypt the string that comes in with it. And it's going to send over the key of password digest instead. And that's what it's going to look into our database for. It's going to look for that column to save that encrypted password into that column. So when we're creating our users table, we want to anticipate that we're going to have some form of authentication. And in our case with Decrypt, that's going to be hashing our password. It's going to change that key or that column name to password digest. So when we create our users, Rails G migration, create users, we're going to have our email, which we're going to have as a string. And then we're also going to have our password digest. And that's coming from Bcrypt. And I really don't have anything like special, like there's no like special data type that this is. It truly is just an encrypted string. So I'm going to say password digest. That's also a string. Email string, password digest string. Cool. All right, let me take a look at that migration. Email, password digest, go ahead and add timestamps to it. And let's go ahead and migrate.
Hey, Meg, just this
Yeah.
side question. Doesn't Bcrypt make like an encrypted hash, but is it saved as a string?
Yes, it's saved as a string. Well, okay, Mike, great. When you said, doesn't Bcrypt make an encrypted hash, what are you imagining that to look like? You said make an encrypted hash, but it's saved as a string.
I kind of imagine it to be, I don't know what the value would be, the key would be, but the value would be the encrypted string. I don't know how the the pair would be outputted, but somehow we just take the value and save that down. That would be my.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked this. So hash is something that's kind of specific to Ruby when we talk about the like curly bracket hash, right? Some other languages will call this like a dictionary. Some of them will just call it an object, but for Ruby, we call it a hash. Hash also means encrypted, like an encrypted string. So when we say that it outputs a hashed password, we're just talking about a string that's encrypted. So this isn't necessarily saying that it comes out, I don't have my pen on me, in some type of like curly bracket hash. We're just using that word again to mean an encrypted string.
Okay, cool. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Okay, so we have this migrated. I'll take a look at my schema, make sure it's in there. Cool, password digest, great. And I love when I'm sure all of y'all feel this way when you like get on a roll with something, some feature test, and then you're like, you know what, let's stop and let's make our model tests. How many of you do that? All of you. Okay. Let's go ahead. Let's jump over to model testing for this before we move on to the feature test, just to make sure that we have this set up the way that we want it to and all of that. So let's create our user spec, .rb meg. And we're going to describe our user model. And let's just look at validations. Okay. So it's using our shoulda matchers. These are already in for you, the shoulda matchers. You all shake heads up. Have you used shoulda matchers before? Thank you. My top 3 people on my screen have all shaken their heads. Yes. So it should validate. Yes, validate, not validates. Presence of, we always want to make sure that it has an email come through. Something else that we want to check is we want to check to make sure that that email is unique. Uniqueness of the email. And then as far as checking to make sure that a password is stored, I still want to have I still want to validate that a password is there, but I'll be validating the presence of not password, but what? Anyone? What should be there instead of password?
The password digest.
Yeah. Yep. I want to make sure that password digest is there, not password. And I see a lot of students get into that issue when they've worked with Bcrypt, that they'll validate that a password is there. The password field will be there before it gets created. So that will pass because it's there. There's like something weird that happens that I've seen before. Like it passes the very first time it gets created because that key was there. But then the second time that you go to look at that user, or if you were trying to update that user, it would be like, there's no password field. I can't, you tried to save this updated user, but it's password digest. It's not password anymore. So we want to validate the presence of password digest instead of password. And let me just run my model test for now to not get too confused. Okay. Yeah, and we're getting all of these errors here with the validation. So we need to make sure that we're validating email, the uniqueness of email, and also that password digest comes through. And I think this is new since I've been working in Ruby. I think they changed up how they want us to do these validations. Isn't it something like validates, email, and then we say presence true. Does that look? It used to just be validates presence of email, but they've just recently changed how the preferred way.
Yeah, this would work.
Okay, thank you. And then we also want to do, I also can put on here uniqueness true. I think we can just add that onto it then. And then I'll also, go ahead.
Would you also want to validate the format of the email so that's always an email that's being passed in?
Yeah, you could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Was that George that asked that?
Yeah, how would you test that? Because
there is,
would that be like a feature or, you know?
Well, I think since it comes with Rails, I don't think you necessarily need to test that it comes, that the, like if you had @gmail.com or whatever, that is getting confirmed that yes, that's an email. But I think that there would be a matching, I don't know it off the top of my head. Maybe if you want to take a look at that, George, and just post it in the Slack channel, there's a different flag that you can put on to just say like validate this to be, or like, I honestly don't really remember what it's called, but there's also a matching test helper for that as well.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, part of me is like, I just wouldn't test it because I know that it just works, because if Rails is shipping it, probably works.
Yeah, but we're still even testing to make
Yeah.
sure that we have these validations present. So you can test that that validation for the unique, or sorry, the format is there, but you don't need to test that that validation works. You just need to test that the validation is there.
Gotcha, it's present. Okay. That makes sense.
Question. And then I'm also going to test password digest or add that validation. And we want that presence to be true. All right, we tested our model. Good. What are we at? 10, 14. We came back at 44. Let's go a little bit longer, and then I'll get y'all a little break. All right, let's go back to our feature test and see where we're at with this, since we have our user model made. There we go. So here, now we're kind of getting to, we can see that this error changed. It used to be that that /register wasn't there, but now since we have a user model, now it can see like user.new is what that value is. So it's making this prediction to look for this user's path. And so we're going to have to create that user's path. Let me pull up. I feel like my screens are all over the place. And then I want, yeah, cool. So let's say here, I'm going to want a post to users. Create. Let me just check my routes to make sure that that's coming through with that helper path of users. Yep, users path post. Great, let's run that again. Oh, unable to find email that is not disabled. Those of you that have worked with form with, do you know what's happening now that I have binded this form to a model? Yeah, Ryan, what do you think?
I'm not sure if this answers it the way you asked it, but I was kind of following along and I just changed it from a symbol to a string, a double quoted string, and it seemed to pass after that.
Yeah, I think with this, when you bind it to a model like this, let's actually just take a look at it. So if I sign up to be a user, let's just inspect this page and take a look at these fields. Yeah, it actually prepends this field that we called it email, but since we bound it to a user, it's going to put this user in front. So this actually, the field isn't called email anymore. It's just called user email. So I'm fine with it being called that. I think I'm just going to update my test to match that, since I have it attached to a user, it went ahead and it changed the actual name of it. So that's fine with me. I'm just going to change my registration spec to use user email, oops, and user password. All right, the action create could not be found for users controller. All right, and these are errors that are good. I'm excited that I'm getting these, nothing out of the ordinary. So I want this create action. I'm going to put a pry in here just to, this is like my go-to anytime that I have to actually make something. I'll just put a pry in to see what I have access to. And in here, let's see what my params look like. Sweet. Okay, so this is good to see. So we have our user information from our form coming through. We have our email coming through, meg@test.com. That's what I put in my test. That's good. And then I also have password coming through with just the plain string, I love foosball. I've done nothing to encrypt this yet. This is okay. This is fine. This is what I would expect. We've done nothing wrong. But we don't want to just go ahead and say user.create with those params, user email and user password. Let's see if I were to do params.require user and permit email and password. So if I were to try to create a user with just the email and the password, think to yourself right now, what do you think is going to happen when I hit enter on this? So I'm saying take whatever the user just put in, meg@test.com, the password of the string of I love foosball. Think to yourself, what's going to happen? Of course, let's see, user.create params.require.permit, forgot that. There we go. Unknown attribute password for user. Right? We tried saying, hey, create a user with this key of email and this key of password and put that into the database. But we got this error back saying we don't have a password column. Instead, we have a password digest. And in order to get that password digest, we need to encrypt that password. So, and that's good because we don't want to save password just plain string like I love foosball in our database. We still have to encrypt this. So the encryption is going to come with that gem Bcrypt, and Bcrypt is so commonly used that it's in our gem file already. It's just commented out. Yeah, here it is, gem Bcrypt. So you can just uncomment it, put it in your gem file, run bundle, and then you have access to the Bcrypt gem. You'll notice that there's this comment above Bcrypt that says use active model has secure password. And this is what I mentioned. I think, Andrew, you had asked a question that was like, at what point does it get hashed? At what point does that happen? And this is the method that works with Bcrypt to be able to see that password key come in, encrypt it, and then send off that password digest key value to the database. So you need this has secure password, that method in your user model to be able to get that password encrypted, to be able to use that Bcrypt gem the way that we're supposed to. Alexander.
So are we using or basically relying on HTTPS to kind of encrypt it up to the controller?
No, it's not encrypted at all until then. As soon as it gets to the controller, that's when we want to take that parameter and we want to encrypt it before saving it to our database. The database is really where we're worried about it getting taken out of without it being encrypted. So there's actually no encryption that's happening.
What's to stop someone from intercepting the HTTP request?
Yeah, I think that in that case, we would have to have it over a secure protocol to prevent that from happening. Because yeah, that is a risk that could happen, that it could get intercepted as just plain text before the creation.
Yeah, like if the request itself is encrypted, then it would make sense to me that the password doesn't necessarily need to be encrypted because just the entire request is encrypted or whatever.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, I think you're right. In that case, we would want to have it over that secure network. But the encryption in this case with Bcrypt is not happening until we actually put that into our model.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up this user model. I'm going to go ahead at the top here and just put this has secure password. And now in our users controller, let me get out of this prize session. Now, if I go and run this again, I'm going to hit this binding.pry that's in here still. And let me pull up this now and say user.create the params that came in for user, the email and the password. Before it didn't work because it was trying to save email to the database and password directly to the database. But now we just put this has secure password in our model. I'm going to hit this with an extra parenthesis. Now I'm getting this user back. It got saved. It got stored in our database. And we can see here that we have that password digest and we're saving that encrypted string. So in order for us to get this encrypted, we needed to have that password field come in. We also needed to enable Bcrypt. And we also needed to have that has secure password. I did not run bundle because I had done this on another branch. And I think that that's why it still is, I'm able to do it, but you would have to run bundle once you uncomment it out. But yeah, now this got stored in here just fine. What questions y'all have? We still have a little bit more we need to do. I want to give you a break, but what questions do you have before we go on the break?
Is it possible to get that password digest and crack it with someone else's key, or is each key unique to like some special instance of like the project? And how does that get tracked as like you have it on Heroku versus like local?
Can you ask that one more time?
Let's say you have like this user base or this database of like these users, and you wanted to migrate that from one database to another, or like you're just migrating platforms, you want to keep the users. With Bcrypt, how does like the new like application know to utilize those passwords and crack those password digests into like actual real passwords after you like switch them over? Or is that not possible and you have to rehash all the passwords again?
Well, that Bcrypt is just its own algorithm. It comes with that SHA-256. So that SHA-256 algorithm is the same no matter where you use Bcrypt.
So then if I had like Bcrypt and like Alex had like his password and it was like his bank account, and I was just like, oh, like, and I grabbed his password, I just like ran Bcrypt on it, I would just have his password.
You would not be able to use, are you saying like if you took his encrypted
Yeah, like if I
password?
took his like, if I took his encrypted password,
Uh-huh.
like he just, and like I somehow like got a hold of that, like I could just run Bcrypt on it and I would have his like another normal password that he would have.
If you took, so like, let's say this over here, right? This is like X12LN. If you took that encrypted bank account password and you tried to run Bcrypt on it, then the encrypted password would get encrypted again. It doesn't undo the encryption that happened.
Oh, so that the mechanism, so you can't use Bcrypt to go the other way around.
No,
It
it's
goes
one way, only one way. Ryan?
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah, I was looking at the docs from some of the stuff you posted on the slides. We're okay to create this without like confirming the password, right? It's like optional when you make this.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so Bcrypt also comes, you're welcome to take a look at that. I'm glad you did. Bcrypt also comes, like it's looking for that password field to come in. It can look for a password _ confirmation field to come in. And when you save that to the database, it'll check to make sure that those match, and then it'll save it to the database. But that's that comes with Bcrypt. And I think it's a great thing to implement in your projects and anytime that you're using Bcrypt. For the sake of this lesson, I didn't do it. But yeah, Bcrypt does come with that option to have a password confirmation field that it can utilize to make it a little bit more secure, make sure that the user knows what password they chose. Yeah, great question. All right, let's take a break. Oh, one more question. Aiden, go ahead.
We can skip it if you want. It's not important.
Let's answer it now, and then we can all go on a break.
So if Bcrypt makes the same hash password, like if my password was really bad and it was like password 1, it would create like the same, just like, you know, gobbledygook thing. So like, what's to stop me from making like a very simple Rails app with Bcrypt and then running through and like creating users for like the like top 10 most common passwords?
Yeah.
And then now I have the like hashed version of those. And then like, I'm like a computer whiz and got access to some databases. And now I have like.
I love when you think like a hacker. That's great. We should all be thinking like that. That's kind of where I think Ksenia kind of brought this up in our warm up. And I mentioned, I don't know if it was exactly that, but I mentioned this idea of adding salt to the encryption. And that salt is server side, or that you would know about. So that makes it a little bit more secure, but it's like adding another layer of encryption onto the already encrypted hash.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. Let's come back at 38. Let's take a longer one. See you at 38.
Megan, we can hear you.
Thank you. Man, I was going for so long. Okay, so where we left off with before the break was we had seen here that we have this user that we created. And once we added this has secure password as well as uncommented out that Bcrypt gem, it takes that password field that came in through our params and it encrypts it into password digest and is able to create this user object for us. So to kind of follow through and create that object in our users controller, let's go ahead and make, let's make a private section here and do strong params for the user params to just pull out the parameters that we would need for our user. So we're requiring user, we have to go into that hash to get to the user key first before we can get to the email and password. And then in our create, we're going to have to do a user.create with our user params. And going off of what we had in this prior session, that all should work. One thing that I think it does mention this in the lesson plan, and something to be aware of when you are authenticating a user is we are making sure that the email for the username in this case, or email in this case, actually, username in the lesson plan is unique. And that uniqueness is case sensitive. And so if I were to have an email address where I signed up for an account that was meg@test.com, and then I also tried signing up for one that was meg@test.com with the lowercase m, then these would be two different email addresses. They would not be unique. So one thing that you might want to do is just make sure that they are in the same format. I think that your lesson plan has it downcased. So we could do something here that's like, params is a keyword. Params, let's just say, this, just so I can kind of have it stored. User email is equal to whatever it came in through the params, and then I just downcase it, and then I can create this here with user. You do something like that. So yeah, take the email that came in from this user params or strong params, downcase it, and then create the user based off of that. So just making sure that that they are all coming in the same way, that we downcase them, and make sure that we are ensuring the uniqueness based off of those emails coming through as downcased. Brisa?
So a slightly silly question, but is sanitizing the same as downcasing, or why exactly would you? I've heard about sanitizing data specifically.
Cool. What did you hear about
don't know what it is.
sanitizing? What does that mean?
I just heard that it's like cleaning up the code or something, so it just like reformats it,
Yes.
so it reads it properly.
Yeah, and you could also have something like a sanitizer happening in the background before you even go to create this. It could take those params, sanitize it, and then send them back to you. But yeah, this is essentially sanitizing our email address. So it's cleaning it up, making sure that we're storing it the way that we want to. And in our case, we're storing it so that we can ensure uniqueness. But yeah, sanitizing could also be like taking out underscores from things, or just other things like that, that you want to make sure that you are kind of like stripping it of unnecessary characters and storing it the way that you want to. Good question. Khan?
Hey, Meg. So on line 8, you have user and then a square bracket email. Is there supposed to be a colon? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Cool. Great. So let's just see where we're at right now. I'm going to go ahead and save this into a variable, not in JavaScript. Let's go ahead and say this is our new user, just so that we can test it out once we hit this pry. Run our test again. And let's just check to make sure a new user, yep, looks like it's getting saved. That all looks good. Let's take this out and just run our test. And what do we have here? Expect page to have content. Welcome, meg@test.com. We're getting this like path error, which some of y'all may have seen before. It's not really very specific on what's happening, but since I'm still in this like post route, I don't have a view that I'm redirecting to or rendering. So I'm having this issue with the path. So where am I expecting? I don't know that I even expected to be. Oh, my dog has kennel cough. So sorry. Yeah, I didn't actually even check to make sure which route I'm on. I think I wanted to go back to the root path once I registered. So I'm just going to put here. Expect it to be the root path, and then maybe I'll get more of a specific error since I didn't have that in there. Yeah, cool. I expected to get this root path, but I'm still in this like post for /users. So just following those errors, I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and redirect to root path. Cool. And we're getting this expected to find text, welcome, megtest.com. And the only thing that's on there still is that link to register. So have y'all, can I see this thumbs up, thumbs down? Have you worked with Flash messages? Awesome. Okay, cool, great. I wasn't expecting that because, well, we might talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, but they are sent with cookies. And so I was like, oh, okay, we haven't talked about cookies yet. So you probably haven't done Flash messages yet. Cool, great. So I think that's the next thing that I'm going to do here, since we haven't really talked through remembering a user yet. I guess I could send along this user to the next view, but I think for now, I just want this to appear, this welcome meg@test.com, and then to go away. So I'm going to go ahead and make a Flash here before redirecting, and let's just put it as info, and we'll have this say welcome. And in here, I need to go ahead and put my new user.email. And in order for this Flash to work, I need to put something in my application.html right before the yield. And let me grab that from the lesson plan just because that would be quickest, something to display it. Okay, so for each Flash message that comes through, create a div with the message that I've noted here, and then have that class name be the key that came through. Cool, let's run this. Great, passing tests. This might not be exactly how we want to do it. I feel like we didn't really do any SAB path testing here, but what we have just looking at this creation is we're taking that information that came through, we're creating a user based off of the email and the password that came through. That create is going to use that has secure password, hash our password, save it as password digest, and then it's going to flash the message and redirect to our root path. We could do something here like if new user .save, just to make sure that the user actually did get saved. Then we want to do those things. And that still works. But I think as far as SAD path, I'm going to skip the SAD path in this case and not redirect back to the register page. But I just wanted to make sure we get through the creation of the user. We got our registration done. And then let's pause here to see what questions anyone might have. Mike.
Just because it's front of mind, I know you said you want to skip the SAD path, but if we were to do a SAD path, would you just do it like an else and then redirect back to the root for them to log in, and then just do like a flash message of your credentials are incorrect, please try again?
Yeah. Credentials incorrect would be for like a login. And I think let's definitely do a SAD path for that. In this case, like we have our validation set up. So some of those we could use the error messages that come from those validations to be able to render those out. Like if someone didn't provide an email address, then that would come along with the response of like an error is the email address was supposed to be present and it wasn't present. And you could go ahead and render that back to them in a flash message. Yeah, that would come in this form of an else.
Thanks. Let me know.
Yeah, thanks. All right, let's go ahead and jump into that then. Let's take a look at logging in. I'm going to grab this user story from the lesson plan and create a login spec. All right, so logging in. As a registered user, I can log in with correct credentials. Just do a little happy path for now. And put this in here. All right, I'm going to try to be better at writing this test. I feel like I had to keep going back and adding things to my test last time. So let's walk through this as a registered user. So I can just go ahead here and say, let me create a user. User.create. Let's have my email be meg@test.com. And my password will be I love foosball. And now we can go through this process. So as a registered user, good, I already have a user created. When I visit the root path and I click on a link that says I already have an account, then I should see a login form. I'm going to expect here to have the current path of just a login path. It's not really put in this user story, but I want to make sure I'm on the right path. So when I visit the root path, good, I click the link, I already have an account, then I should see a login form when I enter my username and password and submit the form. So we'll go ahead and say, fill in email with, let me just take this. In this case, we're not going to be binding it to a model. So I'm just going to take the user out of here. So meg@test.com and the password with that. And then let's go ahead and click the button, log in. Then I'm redirected to the home page. So expect the current path to be the root path. And I see a welcome message with my name on it. I should no longer see the link that says I already have an account. And I should no longer see the link that says register as a user. And I should see a link that says log out. So there's a lot of things there. This one here is similar to what I had in the registration specs. Let me grab that. I'm still expecting to have that. I want the page to not have link. I already have an account. And it also should not have the link for registering a user, but it should have a link for logging out. All right. Cool. Let's go ahead and run this. And we don't have that link. I already have an account. And this is happening on our welcome page. So that's on our welcome index. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that link and say, I already have an account. And I want this to go to the login path. Login is where I want that to direct me to. I don't have that route set up yet. So we're going to go ahead and make that in our routes and have this get to login. And I think for right now, since we haven't really gotten into sessions yet, I would like to refactor this later. For right now, I'm going to make this non-RESTful and just have this go to a login form action on the user's controller. And really what I want to happen with this login form is for that to be attached to a view that has the form where I can enter my email and my password and log in. So I'm going to go ahead and create that in my user's controller. Let's create a login form. And I need to create that view for the login form. So in my view for users, we'll have a login form, .html.erb. And this is where I'm going to have to put that form to log in. I'll go ahead and run this just to make sure it's all connected. Great. So unable to find email that's not disabled. I'm going to use this as just a reference and copy this over to my login form. There's going to be some things I need to tweak. I no longer want to bind this to a model. I want to send this information to a certain path. I guess URL I want this to go to is going to be the login path. The method I want it to use is going to be post. And I think that's all that I need to switch up there for form width. And then the other thing that I need to change here is just my submit button I had called login. Great. So no route matches post login. We made the get to go to the login page, but we don't have the post to actually bring that user in and check their credentials. So let's go ahead and make that route for our post to login. And let's have that go to the login user. Great. So the action login user cannot be found. So in our users controller, I'm going to go ahead and create our login user. And taking a look back at kind of like what we've written so far with this, like as a user, when you register or log into an application, what do you expect to happen? What do we have here? Take credentials. Yeah, this part I'm kind of looking at. Take credentials provided by the user and check against what's stored in the database. So I want to take those parameters that came in from the user, and I want to check to see if those parameters match up with any users that I have in my database. So let's go ahead in here and let me put a pry in here and just see kind of what we're working with. And here, when we get to our login user, if we take a look at params, we can see our email come in as well as our password. And that password just as plain string is not saved into our database, but we can look to see if we have a user that has this specific email. So I could say something here like user.findby, the email, I'll just say here is meg@test.com. And we do have that user in there. So that's good. But in order to check to see if that user is who they say they are, again, who they say they are, we want to make sure that we can authenticate that user. We need to make sure that this password is the password that we have in our database. But I can't just check this I love foosball against the database because the password's encrypted. So I would have to do something like, okay, let's go ahead and encrypt password, see what that comes out to be, and then let's match that with what's in our database. But Bcrypt also has this nice, easy method called Authenticate, which we can, let me just save this user to a variable. Let's say user equals user.find. And I can use this Authenticate method that comes with Bcrypt. And all I have to do in here is pass in that string password that came in from the user, and Bcrypt will go ahead and run that through the algorithm again and check to see if that string matches what's in the database for that user. So in here, I'm just going to take this string, authenticate with this, and I get back a user. So it's giving me back that user object just to show you, like, what if I had here, I love soccer instead of I love foosball? Then I would get this false. Right, so I gave it the correct string of the password, it encrypted it, it checked it against what I had in the database for that user, and it was like, yep, that works, here's your user back. So this Authenticate we can use to check to see if the password that the user passed in when logging in matches what we have in the database. So I'm going to go ahead and take this user.authenticate, and I'm going to have to, I guess before I do this, I'll have to look up the user. user.find by params. I don't think I can just do params email. Oh yeah, params email. Oh, I guess I was thinking that it was nested under user, but we're not binding this to a model anymore. So that's fine. So I can say user find by the email being equal to whatever came through the params for our email. And I want to authenticate it with whatever came through our params for the password. And let's just leave it at that for now. Let's jump out, run our tests. And we're getting this redirect. So I'm going to follow these error messages, but there's still a little bit more that we need to do. But hopefully our error messages will lead us there. So expected this root path, and we got this login still. We're still on this. We're still kind of like stuck in this action. We haven't redirected yet. So it's looking for us to redirect to the root path. So we'll go ahead and redirect there. It's also looking for us to have this flash message, which we have something similar up here. I'm just going to grab that. So we're saying, go ahead and flash that welcome for the user once they log in. And now we're getting to this, like, I already have an account. We don't want to see this login and registration links if someone's already logged in. I think for right now, just to kind of like make sure that we're logging in a user correctly, I'm just going to comment these out for now, and I want to worry about that later. If I just run the tests up until that point, everything is passing. What have we not done within the login process yet, though? So right now, we're saying we'll have anyone put in their email and password. We'll go ahead to this login user path, this action here. We'll find that user, we'll authenticate it, we'll flash this message and redirect them. I think I kind of worded that weird. The issue that we're having right now, or not necessarily an issue, we just haven't done it yet, is this is like very much happy path still. We're just assuming that the user got authenticated. And honestly, even if this returned false, we still flash the welcome message and we redirect to the root path. So we have to have some type of conditional here to say, like, if they authenticated, then let's go ahead and redirect them to the root path. Otherwise, let's do something else. So just to kind of check that too, I'm going to, like I said, pause on the test that I had over here. I have them commented out. I'm going to go ahead and create another test for just the sad path for this case. And this will kind of get into, Mike, what you had asked as well. We'll kind of show that sad path here. So as a registered user, I can't log in with incorrect credentials. So let's say here, I said, I love food, or I love soccer instead of I love foosball. I try to log in. I would expect maybe to be redirected back to the login path so that I could do it again. And then maybe I'd have a flash message then that didn't say welcome meg@test.com because I shouldn't have been logged in. I should have something that says like your email or password are incorrect. This is important here, like how you communicate this to your user. If you were to say something like, oh, we found your email, but your password isn't there, then that user, like maybe this is someone that's trying to get access to something they shouldn't, then they know, oh, hey, that person does have an account here. Let me keep trying more passwords. So just kind of like be careful with the messaging that you give your user. In this case, I'm saying it could be your email, could be your password. Something's not right, but I'm not really telling them which one was wrong. So there's my sad path. I just want to make sure that it goes to the login path. It doesn't go to the root path, and that I give that messaging to my user. Yeah, and so I'm still getting that root path, right? I didn't actually validate that that user was authenticated or not. So in here, I can actually just use, since this like authenticate params password, that returns either the user object or it returns false. I can use that within my conditional and just say like, if it's authenticated, go ahead and do those things. Else, let's go ahead and flash, we'll say like an error message that says your email or password are incorrect. And then let's redirect to, actually, I guess we could just render. In this case, we want to render the login form. Cool. So now we are able to use that authentication to be able to redirect the user if it was correct or if they were not correct. Any questions on finding the user and authenticating them with that login process? Go ahead, Mike.
Just want to double check the .authenticate off the user on 21. We get that access to that method just from our Bcrypt gem, right? After we've done the has secure password at the model.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I thought you were going to bring this up, but you didn't, which is why I did but yes, still a good question. The other thing I wanted to bring up is if an email is not able to be found, like if we were to say, like, if we looked for an email that wasn't present, then this would probably error out because user would be nil. And so we might want to do something here, like, I didn't have this in my sad path, but if user is like actually something that is not nil and it's authenticated, then let's do that. So there's like a little edge case there I just thought of too. Any other questions? All right. The part that we have kind of, I commented out up here. Let me go ahead and comment that back in, or put that back in and run it. And we're still going to get this error here of like, I'm expecting to not have this link of I have an account already, but I still have it. If I were to just like, let's see this in action and look at our actual application. So I don't have someone registered right now. megatest.com. And I register. So when I register, I still see, and this kind of goes the same way for registering and logging out. I'd expect the same thing to happen. When I register, I still see this like sign up to be a user. I already see this, or still see this, I already have an account. But if I'm already logged in, if I'm already registered, I want to be remembered, and I want to make sure that like these links, if they're not necessary for me to have in my view anymore, because I'm already registered, I should already be logged in. But currently we're not really getting remembered. And so kind of taking a look at these, this is where I'm going to do a little bit of dream driving. Let me think how I want to format this, because I want you all to do a little bit of research on this as well. Yeah, let's do this. So currently in our form for, let's just look at our login. So if we look at our login form, not our login form, our root path, so our welcome index. This is where I went. So these links are always coming, but ideally I have something in here that's like, if someone signed in, then I want to go ahead and display those, or not display those. Let me put this here. If someone signed in, then I want to have a link here for logging out. Otherwise, I want those links to appear. If someone's not logged in, then I want to have those links there. Currently, kind of like the issue that we would run into is that our app is not really remembering who the user is. We've authenticated the user. We've said like, yep, you are who you say you are. But in order for our view to kind of know like, yeah, someone's logged in, we need to make sure that we are sending back that information that shows that like someone is actually using our website. And so this is where I want to get into this this topic of cookies and sessions, trying to remember a user. Let's look at, let me do this. All right, so right now, let's say, get this how I want it to be. Let's say right now we have our computer and we have our server over here, and we go ahead and we make a request and we say, let's go ahead and log in. And when we say let's log in, we go ahead and we give our email and we give our password. That's a B password. And we send that to our server. Hold on. And our server looks us up. They're like, yep, I know who you are. And then they send back that HTML and everything else that comes with our root path. It's like, okay, here you go. I'll show you your root path again. Let's think about your current project. Let's say I'm like, okay, now that I'm logged in, go ahead and show me, I want to see who my friends are. So I go to /friends, and then we get to your server and your server's like, whose friends? Whose friends are you talking about? Right? We're not remembering who is logged in. So we would get some type of error message coming back, error, to our client saying, I don't know whose friends you're trying to find. So we would have to do something like /friends, let me give you my email and I'll give you my password again. And then they're like, oh, your server's like, okay, I know who you are and I can go ahead and get those friends for you. So then we get our 200 response and it goes ahead and it gives us our friends back. But to avoid this, and actually before I even get to avoid it, why is this happening? What aspect of HTTP are we demonstrating right now? The fact that I can't stay logged in after logging in once. What's the issue? Alexander?
I think it's stateless.
Yeah, you got it. So HTTP is stateless. We don't have any memory. Stateless. Every single call, that request and response cycle is independent from any other one. So as soon as I log in the first time, it's like, yep, you are who you say you are. Here's your root path. Here's your page that I'm supposed to redirect you to. And the next time when I go to friends, it's like, okay, I don't remember who you are, so I can't show you that information. So because it's stateless, this is where we get into cookies. And in our case that we're going to talk about today, just like little intro, is sessions. And so I think before talking through cookies and sessions, do I have enough time for y'all to do a little research? Yes. Okay. What I want y'all to do before we kind of come back and diagram it out and then get through our login process and remembering our user, I want y'all to take some time to look at, there's this like little, we have a intro to cookies and sessions lesson. It's actually an old one that we made in Mod 2, I believe. Yeah. So I'm going to drop this in your channel. There are some like good videos in here that I think are helpful for understanding cookies and sessions, specifically for Rails. I think that this first one, watch this video about sessions and cookies, that's a good one. There's like a nice analogy in there. But I want you all to kind of like take this time, if you want to use this resource that Turing came up with to kind of go through what a cookie is, you're more than welcome to. If you want to go off on your own and do some of your own research on cookies and sessions specific to Rails, you're more than welcome to do that too. But I think what I'm going to do is give you 15 minutes. We'll come back at 11:30 talk about cookies and sessions, what you all discovered, what you learned about cookies and sessions, and then we'll go ahead and implement remembering a user using a session. Okay. So let me drop this in your channel. I want you to work on this on your own. So you're more than welcome to go ahead and just like turn your camera off and work on this at your own pace. But let's come back. We'll turn our cameras on at 11:30 and then we'll go over this. But go ahead and do some exploration on your own. If you want to take a little break in that time, you're welcome to. See you at 11:30. All right, go ahead and slowly come on back, wrap up what you're looking at. And again, I'll preface this, I don't have too much time left with this class, but I'll preface this like little brain dump with tomorrow, we're going to be going more in depth with cookies and sessions. Today, I just want to make sure we have like an understanding of why we have them and mainly looking at a session and why we would be using a session in the case for authentication. So looking at what y'all did now and any research that you did, can you go ahead and I want you to DM me anything, and this is on the Zoom chat. DM me anything new that you learned about cookies or anything that you learned about sessions. Just something new you learned about cookies or sessions. Go ahead and DM me in the Zoom chat. And if it's nothing new and you just want to confirm that you read what you already knew, you can also say those things. Nice. Cool. Cookies and sessions help make something that's stateless, stateful. Nice. Yep, 4 kilobytes for cookies. Yeah, nice. All of these are great, y'all. Holds user identification and remembers it. Good. Awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of similar things. So I'm glad y'all are able to either watch some videos or do some of your own research. Some of these things that I'm seeing coming through are things like your cookies are stored client side. That's a common theme I'm seeing in some of your answers. I also see that sessions can be stored. They can be stored either client side or server side. In Rails, did anyone see this? Specifically in Rails, how is a session stored? Ksenia?
By default on the client side, which is not conventional.
Yeah, I wouldn't say not conventional, but maybe like not normal, right? There's definitely pros and cons to either keeping it on the client side or saving it on the server side. What do you think? Let me put this here. Rails stores session data on client side. What's one of the like pros? And I'll take a volunteer for this. Just raise hand. What's a pro of storing session data on the client side? And really, it could be like pro of storing anything client side. Logan?
The server doesn't have to look it up every single time you need that information.
Yeah, it's quick, right? We just keep passing it back and forth. Server doesn't need to jump into the database or make any calls for some reason. Or in this case, when we have this session, or in our case with Rails, a session stored on a cookie, that information is stored on the client side. So we don't need to go ahead and look it up when we get it back. It's already present. What's some other pros that we have? Or we could think about cons of it too. I think one thing that I would think of with, or like that you have to be kind of careful of, and I don't think that I've ever actually gone over the limit of like, what is it, 4 kilobytes on a cookie, but that's one thing, like we can't store a lot of data, but it does, one of the pros, or so that could be like kind of a con, but one of the pros is that it is quicker. Cool. Let's take a look. So jumping back to this then, just to kind of like go over this one more time and kind of think about like Rails specific sessions, since they do kind of work a little differently than other frameworks, in that we are storing our session on a cookie instead of within our database. And we can talk a little bit more tomorrow about like, what would that look like? What are the pros of storing it in a database versus putting it on a cookie like Rails does? And by default, like Ksenia said, it is stored on a cookie and we serve it, or we save it on the client side. In our case, for a Rails app, anytime that we spin up a Rails app, there's a session cookie that's immediately passed. And so let's say like immediately we go to just our root path. As soon as we connect to our server the very first time, we get this cookie, session cookie, haha, cookie. Let me go ahead and put a little S on here. We have our little session cookie that gets created and sent along the very first time that we create that connection. And this session cookie, when it's going to get passed back and forth with every single request and response cycle that happens within our app, and we can store more information in that session cookie. What is unique about a session cookie than other cookies, a non-session cookie? Why might we want to store sensitive data in a session cookie other than another cookie, just a regular old cookie? George.
Session cookies expire?
Session cookies expire, so do other cookies. Session cookies expire, they specifically expire when you close out your browser.
Yeah. That's kind of, yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, and that could also be one of the reasons. Session cookies are encrypted, right? I think that some of y'all mentioned that in some of these DMs as well. But session data is going to be encrypted, whereas in other cookies, they aren't necessarily encrypted. So the user is not able to read them. The only place that we're able to read it would be on our server side. So immediately when we make that connection, that session cookie is created. Anytime we add more information to the session, it's put onto that session, encrypted, and sent back. So for example, if we were to log in, let's say like currently, we're on our client side. And if we were to go ahead and, I don't like green, let's go ahead to our login. And let's go ahead and give our email and our password. And we go ahead and we hit our server. Now, with that request, we're sending over this session cookie. In our application, or on our server side, we're able to see that session ID and go ahead and assign this, or like a certain ID or a user ID even, of who was authenticated. So I could say something like, maybe we have something like user ID, as soon as we authenticate this user, is 3. Again, this would be encrypted, but just so we can kind of like read it and understand what's getting sent along. This would go ahead and get put on the session cookie. And now we'll go ahead and get our response back. And with our response, we'll go ahead and also have this session cookie sent back, so that now the next time that I go ahead and say, hey, can I go ahead and see who are my friends? I don't need to send this information because that information is stored within this cookie. And so when I get to my server side, it's like, okay, you want to see your friends? Who are you? Let me unpack this session data and see who you are, grab your friends. And now I can go ahead and send back that information that you're looking for, because I realize that I've already authenticated who you are. The session is currently going, and it will also pass back that session cookie with the response. So this keeps getting sent back and forth. Things can get added to it, things can get deleted from it, but it's going to be sent within this cycle. Any questions kind of like higher level right now? Again, tomorrow we're going to get a little bit more into it. But any other questions right now as far as a session, the use of a session for authentication purposes? It's okay if it's like, this is so new, I don't have questions right now. We're going to jump in and just get this done in code, and you might have questions after that as well. All right, let's take a look at this in our app right now. So we kind of mentioned this issue that we're having right now is that we want to be able to distinguish when someone is logged in or not, when someone has a session going. And in order to do that, we need to assign that session user ID to be able to recognize, okay, there's a user ID in here. That means that this session has already started. That must mean that I've already authenticated a user. So we want to remember the user when someone logs in or when someone registers. So this test is currently for logging in. So I'm going to take a look at the user. So much up right now, users controller. And in that login user. So in here, we're saying once we authenticate a user and we agree, yes, this is someone that is registered, and let's go ahead and log them in. We can then set a session ID to help remember that user that's logged in. So this session keyword comes with Rails. It's something that like we can access anytime we want from within our controller. And so in here, I could say, let's go, and it's a session is like very hash-like, it acts like a hash. So in here, I'll say, let's go ahead and create this key of user ID. And let's let that user ID be this authenticated user's ID. So now with that session cookie that's being passed back and forth, I'm adding this new key value of user ID being whatever the user that's authenticated their ID. I would probably do the same thing then for creating, like if the user got saved, then let's go ahead and add their ID to the session to say like, yep, they're logged in, let's remember them. In our index, which is where we kind of like want this logic to be, we want to say something along the lines of like, let's get rid of this. If there is a current user, and I'm just going to use this as like a variable for right now. If there is a current user, then we want to have that link to log out. And we'll have to put a path there. Otherwise, all of my shortcuts, I haven't used VS Code since being in Ruby last, so I'm learning all of the shortcuts again. Otherwise, I want to see that sign up link and I want to see that login link as well. And then we'll go ahead and end it here. We don't currently have this current user. We haven't really set anything up yet, but I'm hoping that like now that we've assigned a session ID upon registration and upon logging in, we should be able to use that to kind of help leverage within our view. So just running our tests. We have, yeah, a lot of the same error messages here. Undefined local variable or method current user. And I'm thinking within all of our views and like when we log in, we want to probably display certain things based off of a current, if someone is a visitor or if someone is logged in. And so we want to be able to access that information, like I said, to kind of like leverage it when we are displaying certain things for either a logged in user or a visitor. And so in order to use something like current user throughout our application and in other views, I can define a helper method for this, which is kind of what I'm trying to do right here. And in order for it to be available to all views I can put it into my application controller. I could also put it directly into the welcome controller and say like, okay, the current user is this user if the session ID came through. But I'm kind of assuming that like, I'm always going to want to know if I have someone logged in or not. So I'm going to create a method in here called current user. And I'm also going to create this helper method, which some of you may have used before. Really what this helper method does, if we're unfamiliar with it, is it takes this method and it makes it available in the view. So then I can call current user from the view. So in here for current user, let me go ahead and just put a pry in here, run this and hit current user. Good. And again, we're hitting current user from this view. As soon as we render that root page, we're saying if current user. And so it's going to this helper method of current user from our application controller, which all of our controllers inherit from. So all of them have access to this current user. And we want to check to see, we want it to return a user if there is a current user. And currently, I don't know what test is running right now, but if we take a look at session user ID, currently it's nil. I think that that's probably from a different test. I need to run a more specific test, but let's see if I can get. There we go. Let me run a specific test so that we can kind of see this working better. Let's run our feature test for, what's this one? Login spec online 4. What do I do? No such file, login spec. What am I doing? Oh, maybe I should do our spec. Okay, cool. So in this case here, I'm visiting the root path my very first time. If I take a look at session user ID, it's nil because I haven't logged anyone in yet. If I exit out of this and I went through in this test, logging in, pressing login and getting redirected to the root path, which is why I'm hitting this current user again. Now, after logging in and after setting that session ID, now I can see that it's 43. So in here, I could do something like user.find by the session user ID. And then I can find that current user. And so now that current user is available to the view. So something like this would definitely be helpful in here. I'm going to have some issues if I just leave it like this, because as we noticed originally when I visited the root path, session user was nil. And so I might want to have some conditional in here of like, if there's a session user ID, like if someone's registered or if someone's logged in and that's been set, then go ahead and find that user and return that user. Because right now, if I just leave it like this and run my test, oh yeah, okay. We're getting this on line 3, oh wait, no, line 13, which is this visit root path before ever logging in or registering when we never authenticate a user. And so it's like, okay, we've never actually saved a user ID. So session user ID is nil. We can't find a user with nil ID. So in here, I'd say something like, and we can just do it here, I guess, if session user ID. Then we want current user to be, we want to return the user with the session user ID if there actually is one stored in the session. And that's passing. So we're able to take away certain links based off of if someone's a current user and show a certain link if someone is a current user as well. We could also add in here some type of like memoization. So I could say like at current user. and then have a memoization here, because